Hello, everyone. Welcome to Why Starting a Podcast is Necessary. I'm going to give everyone a little bit more time to join us, but I'm so glad that you're here. I love talking about podcasting, it's one of my favorite things. So, thank you so much for joining. I definitely have my podcaster voice on right now, so if it gets a little annoying, I'm sorry. But yeah, we're just going to wait like another 2 minutes and then we'll go ahead and get started. This is new technology for me, so I am learning along the way. We'll see how this goes, see if I like it, see if this is where I continue to do this type of content. But I thought I'd try something new, go out there, do something cool. That's what the kids are doing, right? Like they're locking in chat, right? That's like a thing that they talk about. This is what it's like to podcast with me. Um, But yes, I'm so excited. I love talking about podcasting. I think more people should start podcasts. So I'm so glad that you're all here to learn how to start a podcast. Like I said, this is new technology to me, but I do think there is a chat that you can ask questions in. And also, if you wanted to join on the stage, there should be like a little plus button down at the bottom for you to go ahead and click, and that will take you to the stage and you can come and talk with me. It would be like podcasting with me. I'm going to go ahead and load up the slides, and then we'll get started. All right. Why starting a podcast is necessary. Yes, even for you. My goal today is to convince you that you need to start a podcast. I'm going to be 100%, you know, transparent in this process. I think there's a lot of reasons to start a podcast in 2025, and I want to help eliminate the barriers from people doing exactly that. So today we're going to talk about why podcasts, why now, answer the question like, what do you want a podcast about? Explore a couple of different formats that you might want to try, talk about how long your podcast should be, and then, of course, talk about gear. My gear is a little bit different, a little bit set up, a little bit fancy, only because I podcast all of the time and I live by a train. So I will talk about that later. And then if you have any questions, again, the chat is open, the Q&A is open, and you are more than welcome to join me on stage if that's something you would like to do. Before we get started, a little bit about me. If you don't know about me, my name is Marissa Garza. I was a born talker. I was one of those kids that was always getting in trouble for talking in school, like all the time. I also wanted to be the teacher, which is a whole other story. But my parents used to play a game where it'd be like, Marissa, if you're quiet for 5 minutes, you can watch the Smurfs on TV or something like that. So I have always been a talker, but I became a podcaster by accident. So what happened is I was in a online community for like television shows. It was a podcast about television shows, and they would podcast after specific shows that were running. And one of my favorite shows at that time was Ted Lasso. So I was like, okay, I have some things to say about Ted Lasso. So I went into the little Discord and I made my little comment about Ted Lasso. And one of the hosts was like, hey, that's pretty interesting stuff. Have you ever watched Cobra Kai? And I was like, no, I haven't watched Cobra Kai. But I'm open to it, like I love a good TV show. So I ended up watching Cobra Kai seasons 1, 2, and 3 in the span of 2 weeks, and then was asked to be on a podcast about Cobra Kai. It was just like a guest stint, didn't think anything would come from it. And that turned out to be the launch of, I guess I could call it a podcasting career. By now, I have either hosted, edited, or produced over 4,000, getting ahead of myself, 400 episodes of television, 400 episodes of podcast episodes, mainly about television. See, this is Mess-essary in action. But through it all, I really fall in love with the format, and I just think it's a really great way to express myself and express my creativity and everything. So I just kind of like fell into it, and sometimes those are the things that stick. As I mentioned, I've been a host, an editor, or a producer. So I've been the person talking, like you're seeing now, or the person editing in the background. And a producer does anything from like coordinating guests to coming up with segments on a podcast, or talking about the production schedule, like when are we going to record, when are we going to release, that type of thing. I currently have 4 podcasts, one of which is about the show The Good Wife from the early 2010s, mainly because my friend Jason and I just like to talk about The Good Wife. No other reasons. If you wanted to use that QR code on the screen, you can get a link to see all of my podcasts. And also, that is a picture of me as a kid talking to my aunt. Couldn't stop talking. So that's enough about me. Let's talk about you and why starting a podcast now is really important. Um, I know you can ask yourself, or at least I have said to myself, like, I don't need to say anything because everybody's already said something. Well, turns out that is not true. Not everything that has to be said has ever been said. I think this is very proven by the fact that we keep remaking TV shows and movies. The delivery of the lines by different actors and different portrayals in different settings proves that the story can be the same, but like also not the same at the same time. And so the world needs to hear your particular take on a specific subject. It does not have to be like you are not repeating someone else's stuff, unless you are, then properly cite your sources. But your world, your point of view is something that is really needed in this world. And I really truly believe that if it's not podcasting, it's writing or art or something. I think we are, as humans, meant to create, and podcasting is just like my main way of creating and expressing myself. And I find that it can also be a really great way that ties into a bunch of other content creation or pieces of art. One of the things it can do is humanize your content. So if you are a blogger, if you are a poet, you could just have a podcast where you're like reading stuff you've already written. People have done that. I've listened to podcasts where people are just reading their blog posts, and it was a whole lot more convenient to me than reading them on the computer screen because I was out for a walk or I was doing my dishes or something like that. And for me, I actually like learn better when I'm moving. So like if I'm on a walk and listening to a podcast, I'm going to like remember the information in that podcast a lot better than if I was listening to a podcast and just sitting down. So when you use a podcast to humanize your content, you're getting the like perspective of that person through not only their words that they're saying, but how they're saying it, like the general vibe, right? Like it comes across in a podcast. It is a great way to repurpose your content. You can go either way with this. You can go from like something written like a blog post and turn it into a podcast, or you can take a podcast, specifically if you're doing like a video podcast these days, you can take a podcast and turn it into a YouTube video, a bunch of, Instagram reels, a LinkedIn post, a threads thread, a blue sky cloud. Is that what we're calling them? A blue sky post. You can do a bunch of things with your podcast content. So it is really kind of a way to speed up that content creation process if you're looking for a way to do that. Another really important point about starting a podcast is that this is content that you own. The audio and video files live on my computer. I have every single podcast I've ever done. I don't know why I still have it. Don't know if I'll ever listen to them again, but I have them. And there is no social media company that can take them down. There's no destroying of the internet or anything that can, take them away from me. There are things that like can take them away from me, but those things are kind of kept at bay because I have those audio files on my computer for myself in my own library. It's content that I own, it's content that I can do with as I choose. And I think that's really important when we're looking at a landscape like 2025, where we started off the year not knowing what the heck was going on with TikTok. We've seen lots of changes in the metaverse, and there's, something is changing constantly every single day. So I think it's really important to just think of a way where you can start to own some of the content that you're putting out there. Unfortunately, sometimes it is part of the game, like playing this content creation game, is that you have to post content on different networks. But if you have a podcast, you can always own that source file and then do with it whatever you'd like. And finally, I think, it's really important that we start to build this culture against the podcast bros. A podcast doesn't have to be like, you don't have to be an expert in something to have a podcast. You can just talk. One of my podcasts that I have is called Remember That One Time, and it's literally just a like stream of consciousness, me talking to the microphone while I'm either out on a walk or something like that. I talked about what it's like to be middle-aged, and showing these different thoughts and showing these different ways of thinking, I think stands against this culture, at least within the podcast community, of podcast bros. And these are things that we really want to start to stand against. At least I do. And so if you're on that on that path as well, starting your own podcast is a great way to do that. Now you may be asking or saying to yourself, this is all great, Marissa. I agree. I want to do this. I want to repurpose my content. I want to humanize it. I want to do all this stuff. But I'm scared. And I got to tell you, like, that's real. Like, putting yourself out there is not, doesn't come easy to some people. And for me, I found it only gets easier the more I do it. So the whole reason I'm able to do, this webinar today is because I am able to, I am like constantly podcasting. If you asked me like 3 years ago to do this, I would not have been able to do it. The other thing is, if you talk to any podcaster, I have not met a podcaster that has not started feeling this way. I have also worked with people who were afraid to play a particular role in a podcast. Like, they didn't want to take the front seat. They didn't want to host, but they're, wanted to be along for the ride, and then grew into their voice and started to be a podcast host in that way. You don't have to be, quote unquote, the star of the show. You can team up with someone and be in it. But I think this comes with the territory of creating something, right? Like, it's a little vulnerable to put yourself out there. It's a little vulnerable to make mistakes in front of people. And the thing is that you are not alone in doing this. I get really excited when I see blooper reels on YouTube videos. I get really excited when I hear people leave things into their podcast that they could have taken out. You're hearing all the ums in this presentation, which could be cut out at other times. So, um, it's just part of the process. And I want to recognize that being scared is part of the process and stand with you as you start this journey into podcasting, because I truly believe it is very worthwhile. All right, to answer the question, like, what should I podcast about? Sometimes we can over-engineer this question. We can think like, oh, let's think of the space and what is the conversation that's needed right now? What is it? I think that's a great goal to have, and I think that you can definitely make some movement in there. But if you're just looking to start a podcast and get comfortable with being on a podcast or starting a podcast or producing a podcast, the easiest question to ask yourself is, like, if I could talk to my best friend, my sister, I don't know, my neighbor for something 4 hours, what would it be? And start there. Start with something you're excited about. Start with something that you want to have a conversation about with people. This is so easy for me to do without really talking to anyone on the other side, because I love podcasting. So it's like, if I could talk about podcasting 4 hours, I would do it. And And that's why it's so exciting for or so easy for me. So I really encourage you when you're talking about like what to podcast about. I'm not trying to discourage any of your ideas. Like definitely if you have one and you feel strong about it, go for it. But the important thing is to feel passionate about it, and the important thing is to feel excited behind it. And because that excitement has to come through the other side of the microphone, right? We just talked about how podcasts can humanize your content, podcasts can show someone your point of view, and all of that is easily transferred through the microphone if you're excited about it. If you're not excited about it, your listeners are not going to be excited about it. And I'm not saying that you have to be like activated all the time, but you know, you want people to not lose interest, and that's a lot easier to do when you are excited. So I'd love to hear what your ideas are. I'd love to hear what you talk to your best friend about for hours and start there. And this also, like, you can start a podcast and never publish it. Like, you can just get in the process of doing it. And so this is a great guiding question when it comes to what to podcast about. I'm sure you've listened to a bunch of different podcasts. So finding your format is the next kind of step once you know what you want to podcast about. And there's a couple of different formats that I wanted to talk about today. The first is the solo format. This is what I'm currently doing in front of all of you. This is a just me talking to a microphone, to a camera. You can decide if you want your podcast to be audio and visual. Like, it doesn't have to be, it can just be audio. But a solo podcast is easy to produce because you are the only person. You do not need to coordinate schedules. You can batch your content. You're in charge of all of the different things. As you know, when it comes to group projects, the more people that you put together, you know, the more conversations you need to have, the more collaboration happens, and those things are great. It just depends on your topic and what you feel comfortable doing. A solo podcast might be the one for you, especially if you're looking to turn podcasts around really quickly. When it comes to an interview format, this obviously is where you are interviewing another person. You can bring a different person on every episode. This does create a little bit more logistical work. You are needing to do things like find guests, get them onboarded, which means usually like collecting some information, getting a photo so that you can share for promotion, doing all of that kind of stuff. And you also need to probably do some research on the person that you're interviewing and prepare your questions ahead of time and do all of that. Preparation is true for all of these. It's just a little bit different for an interview format. I enjoy interview formats when you're just like talking about a specific topic. I like hearing different points of view on a specific topic. So if you wanted to like bring in a bunch of different experts, an interview format is really great for that. And then the last part, or the last format I wanted to talk about today, is a conversational format. And that's usually where you have a host and a co-host. And sometimes, like, these are the ones that you'll see on social media where they're like kicking it back on a sofa with a microphone, or, you know, talking to each other, just I don't like having a gossip session. Like, that's an example of a conversational podcast. Another example would be like the podcast that I was on before about television. We had a host and a co-host, and we would always just talk about the show as a whole. We'd bring on a guest every now and then. But this is where the audience is used to having the same set of people talking in the same sort of format for the same amount of time. When it comes to conversational podcasts, you definitely want to make sure that you're two thumbs up all of the time, because otherwise, that's you know, you're not doing it right according to this picture. Conversational and co-hosted workshops or podcasts are also great for sharing the workload. You know, you can split up who's doing what. One person could be editing, one person can be preparing. With an interview style podcast, it's usually on that one person, on that host, to do the preparation and all of that, unless you're partnering with a producer. In a conversational podcast, you really have that opportunity to split up some of the work and work together as a team. So these are the 3 easiest podcast formats to start with. Depending on your topic, depending on your time, depending on what you want to achieve with your show, you will find the format that works best for you. Let's talk about podcast timing. This is always a question I get, like, how long should a podcast be? I have produced podcasts that are anywhere from 10 minutes to 2 hours and 30 minutes long. And they've all been listened to. I don't think there's a magic number here. I think like the average podcast length is around 40 minutes. That gives people enough time to sort of like be invested in what you're talking about and want to come back for more. There are some podcasts that are like super deep dives. I've listened to a 4-hour podcast, but that was mainly because I was in a car driving across the country and it was really easy to do. The thing about podcasts is, people can listen to them at any time and you're not competing with an algorithm. So when people press play, like they are choosing to listen to your content. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about podcast length, because if you want to do like super deep divey podcasts, you don't have to like release one every week. Like you can just release one every month if you wanted to. And people will build up a library of episodes to listen to. So it can vary how whatever fits best for you. I know this isn't very helpful because I'm saying a lot of like whatever works for you. But honestly, whatever works for you, you are the one who's producing the show and people are tuning in for you. So whatever you feel comfortable with is the answer. You can always produce your podcast in a season or a series. When you're looking at a season, it gives you an opportunity to kind of like take a break and prepare content in the off season, for lack of a better term. I like this style of podcasting because it does, put a finite start and end date on when you're really putting together like a capsule of episodes. Seasons are nice for, you know, if you don't want to burn yourself out. If you are working by yourself, it's a little bit easier um, to manage. If you're working with someone else, you just need to communicate those what that season will be. Seasons can be themed, seasons could not be themed. Seasons don't also have to all be the same length. You just need to be really clear with your listeners and say like, hey, after this episode, we're going to be on hiatus for a while. We'll be back in whatever month you choose to come back in. If the thought of producing a weekly show or a seasonal show is a little bit, overwhelming, you can start with or stick with a series. One of the most successful podcasts started as a series, Serial, and it was just I think like 8 episodes long, and it went through that specific court case, and people have tuned in, and it's still one of the most popular podcasts that ever was produced. And yes, they did, go on and make other series and do other things, but that was because they had tried this format and it really, really stuck. So if you just wanted to produce podcasts that were about a specific topic, or even think of it as like maybe even like a mini course or something like that, a series is a really great format for you to experiment with. All of this said, as long as you are communicating with your audience, you could basically have everything in the same podcast. You can start off as a weekly podcast and then take a break and make it into a seasonal podcast. You could have a series that comes on, like maybe at the end of every quarter, there's like a special series, like a very special episode, but a very special series of your podcast. You could also have multiple shows that explore all of these different things. I just wanted to expose you to the different types of podcast lengths and ways of arranging your shows that you can play with. The most important thing again is just to communicate with your listeners. Listeners will get very like attached to hearing the same sounds, being in the same rhythm. They know when a podcast is going to come out. So as long as you're keeping in contact with them, you're going to be in good shape. Finally, not finally, but we have come to don't fear the gear. So many times, and I'm guilty of this as well, we can say, I'm not going to start this project because I don't have the right gear. Or I'm going to need this very fancy thingamabob to do this very specific thing. When it comes to podcasting, what I like about it so much is that it is so accessible because you have the option to produce either a audio podcast, a visual podcast, or release both versions. That really kind of depend. That allows you to like play with whatever gear that you need. And even if you are doing a audio podcast only, if you're doing an interview, you still are going to need a camera, but you don't necessarily have to worry about being quote unquote on camera. So if you were in this workshop, chances are you have everything that you need to start a podcast. You need a microphone, you need some headphones, and you need a computer. When it comes to a microphone, you do not need to get as fancy of a microphone as this one. Again, I mentioned at the beginning, I live by a train, so I need a microphone that is only going to pick up noise in this specific zone. If I move away from my microphone, my chair will creak, but you might not also hear me as well. So let's try that. Like if I'm over here, you might not hear me, but as I bring my microphone closer, you can hopefully hear me a lot easier. And that is because of this specific microphone. But you can use your AirPods. You can use your wired headphones or your wired headphones with a microphone. The first podcast I ever did was using a one-eared Bluetooth headset from work. You don't necessarily need to invest in gear, specifically at the beginning. Don't waste your money until you like know it won't be a waste, basically, until you know this is something that you're going to continue doing. I didn't get this microphone until like 2 years into podcasting. I spent a lot of time recording in my closet, quite frankly, to sort of dampen the sound because I didn't know about these type of microphones. So use what you have. When it comes to headphones, it's really important to have headphones because when you are talking to someone, the microphone is going to pick up everything. If it hasn't picked up everything in the course of my presentation today, it picks up everything. And you don't want the voice of the person that you're talking to come through the microphone and create this echo effect. You can get by with just like wired earplug or ear pods, like the ones that stick in your ear. I like to wear the over the ear version of headphones because again, I'm by the train. I like to, make sure that I can hear the people that I am speaking to. So this kind of just helps me focus. Find the headphones that work best for you, but do not think while you can record a podcast without headphones, it just kind of ensures that you have a better podcast if you do wear headphones. I hope that helps. When it comes to your computer, you technically don't need a computer. You can use your phone. You can use something that you are recording into. I just find it's really easy to use my computer and just have it save the file for me. And that's what I'll use to edit. But these are the main three things that you need to get started in podcasting to do the basics. I would be lying, though, if I said you didn't also need some other things. So you're going to need some recording software, something to record all of this in. If you are on a PC, Audacity works just fine. It's 100% free. And if you are on a Mac, you can also use GarageBand. That also works well, specifically if you are recording locally and not recording with somebody else. If you are recording with somebody else, but have like two microphones plugged into your computer. If you're going to do a virtual conversation or something like that, you will need recording software to do that. Some things I can suggest are something that's free called Squadcast that will produce high quality recordings of audio and video for each person on your podcast. So you're going to get individual recordings for every single person. That's really important. But you can also set Zoom up to do the exact same thing. So if you have a Zoom account, you can record your podcast interviewing people, having guests on, that sort of thing, just by using Zoom. I know many people who do this. I've set up Zoom as a backup for myself, and it's really easy to do. So don't stress thinking that you need to have like a lot of different recording software. Start free. Again, start with what you have. But if you wanted to have a conversation with someone, Zoom is a great way to go. Also, you're going to need to edit your podcast. So, um, when you're doing that, and I'm not saying that because you want to like cut out all the ums and ahs and all of the awkward things that you've already seen me say in this presentation. But you want to add some music, you want to add some vibes, you want to add like a transition here or there, or maybe you have like an ad that you want to put in. This requires that you cut and insert, you copy and paste certain things into your podcast, and editing software is how you do that. Again, GarageBand and Audacity, great free options that allow you to do that. I tend to favor something called Descript that allows you to edit both video and audio just like you were editing a Word document. So you upload your video and it creates a transcript. And if you wanted to cut out a specific part of your podcast, you just highlight the words and hit delete, and bada bing, bada boom, it has cut both the video and the audio file so that it has matched up. There are other softwares that do this as well. Riverside FM is something that you can use to record and edit as well. It is supported by Spotify. So there's another option for you as well. Speaking of Spotify, you also need a place to host your podcast. So this is, the cloud, basically. Like the file has to go somewhere so that people can get to it. And your hosting platform is going to be the thing that facilitates that for you. I mentioned Spotify because Spotify does have a free platform called Spotify for Creators where you can upload video and audio files to their platform, and it will be distributed not only to Spotify but also to Apple Podcasts or any other podcast feeds that you want your podcast to go on. You can also use something like Buzzsprout. There's a bunch. Just Google them. Things to pay attention to is the amount of space that you have. Think about if you are going to do a video podcast, does it need to be a video podcast in a podcast feed, or can it just be a video podcast on YouTube? I mention that because the amount of space that you have is really important to keep in mind when it comes to the file size of your podcast. Video files are larger than audio files. So make sure that you just get the plan that works best for you. If you want to do everything like completely free, I would recommend Spotify for Creators for your podcast. You can upload video and audio there. And then I also would recommend YouTube. YouTube is the number one podcast listening platform in the United States at the current moment. A lot of people are listening to podcasts on YouTube. YouTube also has integrated podcast tools to help kind of distribute your podcast as well. So those are two really great free options that you don't need to invest in to host your podcast. You will need a word processor to put together your show notes and write any of your promotion copy, things like that. I don't even know if we use the word processor anymore. I don't know what else to call like Google Docs or Word, but you need one of those to make sure that you are able to edit and post your show notes correctly. And then finally, you need the internet to upload, and also, if you're going to have virtual conversations with people to facilitate those conversations, I highly recommend being connected via Ethernet when you are doing remote interviews to make sure that the signal is strong. Do not recommend recording over a phone, like as a hotspot, unless it's like super strong and you're in a major metropolitan area. But like if you're in the middle of nowhere and you're like, yeah, I have a hotspot, I don't trust it. So that's kind of the rundown of, what you need to start your podcast. Or you can have like a friend or community, that might support you. in this endeavor, that friend and or community member could be me. I'm happy to help you put all of this together. And I've actually put together a free resource for you. I normally sell this as a standalone product, but I am including it in the workshop today. It is a private podcast called Mess-essary Podcasting. This is another way that you can use podcasts to help you. If you're not a fan of email, you can just have like a private podcast feed and use it as like an email list of sorts. But I put together about 13 episodes for you that continue the conversation, go into things a little bit more in depth. You can access it by using the QR code on the screen or by clicking the button, because I figured out how to do that at the bottom of your screen as well. This will take you to a page where you can sign up. All I need is your email. You will get a link that is dedicated for you. And then the first 5 episodes will show up right away. And then every 2 days after that, you will get another episode of Mess-essary Podcasting. It's going to go a little bit more in depth than what we did today. And then at the end, there is an invite to a community if you would like to join. It's just a Patreon. It's nothing super fancy, but it is a way for us to create podcasts in community. Because like I said, I really do think that podcasting is one of the easiest ways to start creating content and get your voice out there. And I want to help as many people as humanly possible that I can do that. So hopefully between this podcast feed and the community that I'm building, you'll be able to join us and do that. If not, I hope that this was like really helpful for you. I know I probably talked really quickly. That also happens to me if I don't have a co-host. But I really enjoyed putting this together for you. And I really hope that you take this to heart, see what you can do, use what you have. Don't be afraid to make a mistake and just like start messy. Like just start messy. We cannot keep waiting for perfection because 1, it doesn't exist. 2, it's a tenet of white supremacy. And 3, well, maybe like put it the other way around. But I think that, you know, the world needs each and every one of us to keep going. And so just start and get something out there. All right. My name is Marissa Garza. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you learned something. I hope you're inspired. Please email me at marissagarza.com to let me know what you thought of this, or leave me a comment wherever you're seeing this. I hope it helped. And until next time. That's the other thing about podcasting. Like you kind of like sometimes you get in this like rhythm and you sign off everything. So now I sign off meetings with like, see you next week. But until next time.